Yeah, so I guess let me ask you, from your perspective, what do you think the purpose of the Great Pyramids were? Because you look at like some of the academics of that time, Manly P. Hall and them, they kind of want to incorporate it being built as part of like the Osirian myth. They had the tunnel that goes underneath between the Sphinx and the pyramids. So then when you came up through that middle chamber, you would be coming up on the balcony right as the sun was rising. But that seems like an awfully big project just for some mystery school initiation. So what are your thoughts on why the pyramid was built in the first place?
Well, first of all, there's no tunnel between the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. Both of those are they're not connected physically with a tunnel at all in any way. So that's just direct physical evidence. But I think
Right.
the original builders were geniuses from a civilization, and what they wanted was instead of poverty, they wanted prosperity, and instead of a desert, they wanted a garden, and instead of toil, they wanted leisure. So they built this massive structure that using water locks and barges, and they built it as infrastructure that the Great Pyramid was a working machine. And
Hmm.
what that machine did was provided prosperity by being a water pump.
Okay, so let me ask you, how would the water pump work then? Because did was it just like pressure that would build up in like the lower level and like shoot up towards the top, or were they using that to kind of like irrigate valleys?
The original builders were able to provide a water source to the base of the Great Pyramid. Other researchers beside myself feel that there's a fundamental link between water and the Great Pyramid, including Christopher Dunn. And we think
Hmm.
the original builders were able to move water from the upper end of the descending passage down into all the way 100 feet below the Great Pyramid into the subterranean chamber. That chamber was oddly constructed with some unfinished area on one end of this large chamber. And we think that acted like a water break, if you will. And the water came in that chamber on one end and it moved slower on the other end and caused the water to move in a whirlpool, a rather
Hmm.
powerful whirlpool. And it
Hmm.
and the original builders were able to use the property of implosion that Victor Schraberger talked about. He's the Austrian researcher over there, in the 30s and 40s, who is attributed to have built the engine for the Foo Fighter and all of that. So certainly people know about Victor Schraberger. Well, they use that force of implosion to move water up to the uh, Grand Gallery. And the Grand Gallery is an airtight chamber. If it wasn't already in a wonder of the world, it would be a wonder of the world. And we think that they were able to use electrolysis in that chamber to separate oxygen and hydrogen. And those two
Hmm.
gases are quite volatile. And when you ignite them, you can, believe it or not, ultimately create a vacuum. So that vacuum helped lift water up in the Grand Gallery. And my books and documentaries talk all about this. And they were able to release that vacuum, and that about 100-ton water piston, if you will, moved back down, and then it compressed water in the Queen's chamber, and then it ultimately went to the King's chamber and out the King's chamber vents. And then the water went down the casing stones through a vent that's now gone because the casing stones are gone. And then the water went to the point of use. So it's kind of a complex process with some check valves and other processes that occur. But my second book, The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, talks about all that in detail, as well as my second documentary. So, yeah, it was a big project, but it had a huge return on investment, and it was well worth building, and provided that water. They used it to for powering machinery, irrigation, of course, probably to generate compressed air and a whole host of purposes.
Wow, wow. I mean, yeah, I mean, just the way you described it, like I'm trying to like wrap my mind around like, what a visual representation of that would be. But like, I mean, just like the effects of it. I mean, how do you think that transformed that society? Do you think it was the Great Pyramid that gave, possibly a collection of tribes into the ability to form like one of the first city states?
Well, certainly, I see the Giza Plateau as originally more of a science center or industrial park than a big graveyard. So, but yeah, I'm sure that they had high technology associated with the output of the water, and did everything that our major infrastructure does. The Hoover Dam over there near Las Vegas, all it does is make electricity go through a wire, but the uses of that ability are endless. So it was quite a feat of engineering created by geniuses that was built to improve their own lives and the lives of their children. It had nothing to do with pointing to a star, or that they wanted to tell us that they knew pi. That's what some have suggested. That's a low return on investment to tell us that they knew pi. So
So let me ask you then. I mean, do you think it was, maybe these pre dynasty Egyptians that were able to construct it? Do you think it was possibly some Sumerian influence?
it was somebody. It could have been built pre last catastrophe, if you will. Maybe before
Mhm.
dynastic Egypt. It could have been before the biblical flood, or before the asteroid strike, or before the political chaos that destroyed that civilization that built it. But they had some certainly some high technology um, that they created, and ultimately used that technology to build their wonder of the world.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, also, ancient people, they were way more advanced than we give them credit for. I mean, particularly when you're looking at, we were talking about it having it be almost an energy source. I mean, you look at like, the Baghdad battery, for instance, right? I mean, they were very aware of how these chemical reactions would interact with each other. Um, so, so yeah. So I guess let me ask you then, if you think it was like maybe pre-dynasty, what sort of time frame are you thinking here? I mean, are you thinking back even more, 2500 BC?
Some have suggested that instead of believing what Egyptologists say, that it was 4,500 years ago, give or take 100 years, that it may have been as much as 100,000 years ago. But exactly when, again, is not the focus of my research. And here's
Mhm.
why. Let's say we decided, or let's say we found out absolutely this information. We found out that the Great Pyramids construction started 10,000 years ago from today. Today is the 10,000th anniversary of the start of the construction of the Great Pyramid. Okay, we know that. The very next question is, well, how did they build the Great Pyramid? And why would they do such a thing? Those two questions are what I concentrate on. So another thing people want to know is who built it? Who funded it? What was the leader? What civilization? And let's say we find out it was a guy named Bob. Bob did it. Bob built the Great Pyramid. Okay. Well, the very next thing you're going to ask is, well, how did he do it? And why? Why would he do such a thing? So I don't focus on the who and the when. I know people that have spent their entire careers on those two questions and have gotten nowhere. So that there may not be enough information to find those the answers to those two questions. So there you
Yeah,
go.
I mean, Yeah, I mean, Egyptologists in general have been feuding with a lot of other sciences about that same thing. Primarily, most recently with geologists. So let me ask you, how do you think, your ideas on the Pyramid of Giza is connected with like that Sphinx water erosion hypothesis?
Yes, Dr. Robert Schoch.
Yeah.
Uh, he wrote two books and brilliant geologist, preeminent in geology. And he studied the Sphinx. He looked at it. It's rock. It's in his wheelhouse, if you will.
Yeah.
And based on the erosion, his assessment is that it's older than 4,500 years, much older than dynastic Egypt, and probably pre-last ice age, if you will, about 11,000 years ago, 12,000 or so. And he was eviscerated by Egyptologists who treated him unbelievable, just tried to destroy him and everything else. It's just horrible how he was treated. But yeah, it makes sense what Dr. Robert Schoch says. I mean, and I'm not threatened by that at all, like Egyptologists are. So I really have a disdain for the so-called science of Egyptology. In fact, on my YouTube channel, they can see a video I made asking the question, is Egyptology a pseudoscience? And it's been well received, that video. So they can go to my website, thepump.org, and click on my YouTube link and watch that video. So yeah, I have no problem with the age of the Sphinx being as old as Dr. Robert Schoch says it is. So
Yeah, I mean, I would take I'm going to take a hard science over, a history or a social science, if you will, any day, because, a hard science, you have physical evidence, right? And you actually have the ability to, test those hypotheses. Primarily with social sciences, dealing with ancient civilizations, you don't really have a way to really test those hypotheses. And even though I would hope that Egyptology has become more academic and reputable over the years, it started off as a pseudoscience for sure.
oh, that's true. Well, there's a lot of things that Egyptology can use the scientific method to corroborate, like workers drug 70-ton payloads up a ramp. And
Yeah.
that is a hypothesis. But Egyptology just stops at a hypothesis and says they declare an edict that it's valid, which isn't science. But if they would drag a 70-ton stone or payload up a dirt ramp, then that would lend credence to their stories. But they don't do that. They've never made even a casing stone. Those are the stones that were on the outside of the Great Pyramid that were cut to extreme precision. Never made one. The entire science. Why would they engage in the scientific method? They have never made a single surface like those of the surfaces of a casing stone of the Great Pyramid. Isn't that interesting? They say that stones were moved on barges. Some of the quarries were 400 miles away down the Nile River. They've never moved a heavy payload on or off of a barge. And only in the realm of Egyptology is there a huge disdain for demonstrations. So it's bizarre. I don't know how they get away with it. Maybe because Egyptology happens to be the richest science in the world, with all their priceless artifacts generating income by people buying tickets to come look at them. So colleges that have departments of Egyptology, yeah, I mean, I lose respect for them.
Yeah, you look at like, their hypothesis. of, just how this was done with just pure manpower and force. I mean, the amount of people that you would need to be pulling these large blocks. I mean, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like it's cohesive with the populations of, like, these city states that we saw at the time, because you're talking about thousands and thousands of people to be putting in hard labor, and that just doesn't seem feasible.
Well, it's not feasible. That's why Egyptology doesn't engage in the scientific method, because their answers are both impossible and wrong. Now myself, I want to tell you something. I can pick up a full-size car. I can just grab it with my hands and pick it up over my head. Okay. I'm telling you that as a fact. And I will provide a demonstration. I will show you by picking up a Hot Wheels car. Okay. And that's what Egyptologists do. They say, we're going to show you how a 70-ton payload is moved. Here's our 1.5-ton stone we're going to move a few feet. Very disingenuous. Very, very disingenuous. That's like if I owed you $15 and I said, okay, here's 15 dimes. Not, there's a issue of scale, okay? But they get away with it. How do they do it? I don't know. Not long ago, they used to teach phrenology in college. That's the science of the correlations between bumps on people's heads and their character traits.
Mhm.
Not long ago, less than 100 years, you could get a college degree in phrenology and all of that. But the problem is that science could not withstand the rigors of the scientific method, and it went away. It went poof, it's gone. The ash bin of rejected ideas. And that's what's going to happen to certainly most of Egyptology. It is, sciences come and go, and it just happens to be in crisis. We're kind of like right before nobody believed phrenology, right before they stopped teaching it. And that's about where we're at with Egyptology.
Yeah, I mean, I have actually one of the phrenology heads up on my shelf that I got at an antique shop, just kind of on my shelf of oddities up there. And I mean, it always gives me a reminder of just how bad science can lead to more bad science, because that was that, and the shape of different skulls and stuff was taken with eugenics. And
Oh yeah.
it's just amazing how
Very crazy.
one bad idea can just lead to so much more bad ideas.
That's true. And actually science, they say, it advances funeral by funeral. So they have to, the people have to die off, and the next generation doesn't believe what the generation before believed, but nobody changes their minds. Like with the Piltdown skull, when it was discovered, all of these anthropologists wrote their doctoral thesis on it, but they didn't reject the Piltdown skull for 40 years, because that's when all those guys died off. The next generation of anthropologists, oh no, we don't believe the Piltdown skull. But the point is, no one changes their mind. So we're just waiting for the Egyptologists to die off.